There was a moment when we weren't sure the type of action the government of Honduras was gonna take against us, whether it was gonna be beyond just the rhetoric, if they were actually going to potentially arrest, in particular, Eric, who had actually moved there, or any of the other of us. Um, and I think that there were a few very dicey instances that led us to have to think of things we'd never had to think of before. So, for example, security contingency plans. What are the hotlines, for example? We're all Americans, so what are the contingencies to the U.S. Embassy? What are the contingencies to extraction if needed? I mean, who's thinking of these things when we start? Who's thinking that you can actually be in physical danger, you or your family, because you're trying to do good for a place?
Think of the prophets with wild visions, and then the founders who realized their dreams. Moses envisioned the promised land and led his people out of bondage, but he needed Joshua to cross the Jordan and establish the new home. Joseph Smith received revelations to found a new faith, while Brigham Young guided the Mormon pioneers westward to build Salt Lake City. Today, I'm speaking with Gabriel Delgado Ayau, co-founder, along with Eric Bremen, of Prospera, an innovative special jurisdiction in Honduras. We don't always get to know our heroes, but I have. Gabriel comes from a family of prophets and builders, and he's one of those rare individuals who embodies both. Gabriel, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. That was an amazing intro, by the way. Thank you so much.
Hey, you got it. So, a lot of people listening don't even know what Prospera is. So, what is it?
Well, there's a lot of ways to describe it. I guess the most basic way is if you're an entrepreneur, is it's a system, a platform that seeks to enable other entrepreneurs to build faster, cheaper, get to market quicker, prove of concept quicker, and with a profit motive, of course, because we do this from the perspective and with the incentives of profit. I think a more philosophical answer is that we seem to have stagnated in the provision of very key services for the flourishing of humanity. And those key services are governance services, are the services of how do you trust people in transactions that you don't know? How do you trust institutions? And it seems that most of our institutions have been in frank deterioration, primarily through this just bad incentives in general. So the answer to what is Prosper from that perspective is it's a platform that provides governance as a service, the key components of governance that are proven to have generated prosperity over time in ways that would have been unimaginable to our forefathers 250 years ago. So, there's a perspective that perhaps in governance we've overshot the mark. There's a sweet spot where we should be at, and that sweet spot lies closer to where the U.S. founding fathers established the system of the United States than where we are now, because it allowed people to fulfill their own dreams and pursue their own ambitions and ideas voluntarily and without coercion. So that's more of a sort of a philosophical question. But in essence, what it is, it's a special economic zone that exists within the country of Honduras in partnership with the country of Honduras that allows for the layering in of governance best practices to make builders and entrepreneurs thrive with the for-profit motive as a key driver of keeping those incentives on the straight and narrow.
You forgive me, the Spanish escapes me, as
No
it
worries.
will. So we can think of let's use the ZEDE, right, which is ZEDE in English,
Right.
which
Yep.
stands for the Spanish word, which is essentially a special jurisdiction, a
Yeah.
special economic jurisdiction.
You can actually translate it into zones for economic development and employment
Oh
and
yeah,
keep the same
great.
Z. Yeah.
Okay. So these structures, we can think of them in terms of tokens and types, I think. The type is the ZA framework that was established in Honduran by a past government, one that is no longer in power.
Yes.
Okay. So that's an interesting thing we want to come back to. And then there is the token, which is your particular, and there are other particular token ZAs, but yours is Prospera.
Okay.
So is that more or less how you see it? Is that a decent explanation of the ZA?
Yeah, that is. I would say that first of all, the Zetas were established by the state of Honduras and not and stamped for approval uh, in most of its institutions, if not all of its institutions, and it's a particular government which is the party in power within these 4 years that has opposed the formation of it or the operation of it. But I would say that that's actually a good way of stating the system versus the specific projects themselves.
Yeah, great. And I remember very early on, maybe around when it was called the Reds, RED, which
Yeah,
is a similar sort of acronym, but yours in particular, the token Prospera, which is sort of on this top-down governance framework that allows you to create these special zones, that these special zones allow you to avoid certain aspects of traditional, let's say, civil law and I want to say corruptible law in the Honduran capital, right? And
right.
set aside certain kinds of legal innovations or other types of law that allow for this human flourishing that you describe. So, what are some of the most powerful features and legal innovations that give Prospera an advantage over other jurisdictions, say, whether
Yeah,
that's on the home, whether that's on the mainland in Honduras, or even American jurisdictions?
got it. So it's a great question. Well, first, let me say that they're in partnership with the host country, and that's actually really important because it allows a country to sort of leapfrog, if you want, the where it's at. If you look at, for example, a global ranking of business ease of doing business, for example, a country like Honduras might be down at 113, 120. As a jurisdiction like this allows you to leapfrog up into the top 10 very, very easily. And why is that? Well, it's actually the framers of the regulatory environment very brilliantly understood that reform and deregulation is super hard. I mean, you can look at the effort in any country, Argentina, the US, anywhere in Europe. The trend is towards more regulation and more finely regulating that which was already regulated. And there's not, and more regulation means less freedom for you to find a way how to fulfill your dreams, while not necessarily lowering the risk profile of that which you're trying to do. So the brilliance of this is understanding that deregulating is extremely hard. So why don't you do a hard reset on most everything that you can constitutionally within a specific uh, piece of land that has nothing on it. So there's no entrenched interest. There's nobody to be displaced. It's a place where people will come voluntarily if they like what they see. So you reset the system in that space, and then you layer on what's best practices. So a lot of what you'll see in Prospera is a common law based layer, and that's important because most of at the end of the day, what you want to do is these zones are created to generate prosperity and prosperity, not just for foreigners, but mainly for the locals. So you want to attract a ton of investment, orders of magnitude more than a country is currently attracting, because that drives job creation at the end of the day and good quality job creation. So you reset the system, you layer in common law in this sense, because that's where most of the international money is that would be available for investment, and you bring what's considered the best practices of common law, and that's what you layer in. And then on top of that, we did some, I would say, pretty innovative things or innovative things, pretty clever things. Um, what we wanted to do is how do we lever market dynamics, which are the most powerful to produce the best outcomes? How do we leverage market dynamics in a regulatory framework such that the pressure is always to keep the system optimized? So what we did, is I can give you two very concrete examples, which I think are cool, which are really exciting to me because let me give you three, but I'll try to be super brief. So one is this option of why do we have to choose the system of the host country? Why can't we raise our heads, look around the world and say, hey, Hong Kong has a great system for finance, or Dubai has a great system for finance. Why don't we use that here? So we allowed for that to happen. You can actually, whether you think a system is better than the one you currently use, or whether you're familiar with the system in the top 30 OECD countries around the world, you can actually use that as your framework for what we call regulated industries. And regulated industries are just industries that might have high levels of negative externalities. And we want to make sure that people that operate in those spaces are responsible for their negative externalities, which is, it's just a common sense thing. So you get to choose what system you like. And if you think of medicine and longevity and just health in general, wouldn't it be cool to go to a place where it's a one-stop shop for the best medicine anywhere in the world, whether it's German medicine or French or German or English or American or Canadian, and you go there and you can choose to deliver the services that you would have to travel to that other country to get because you wouldn't be able to get them in your home country. So I think that's super cool. Now,
It's sort of like institutional gene splicing almost. It's like you see this feature of law, and you do appreciate the common law in particular, commercial law that's based not on statutes more than it is
yep,
precedents and case law.
yep,
And then you have this well-established law that you can pull from the past.
yep,
Like it manages to preserve the wisdom of the past, but it
exactly.
also involves some interesting legal innovations that you guys have developed. I'm thinking about how you use insurance,
Yeah,
for
yeah. So
example,
that
is
was the
in a
other
novel
example.
way. Oh,
Yeah,
okay. Sorry to
yeah,
short circuit.
that's the other stuff. So here you are in a regulated industry. Say you want to build something, and we're on an island, so we have to take care of the coral, and there's these potential negative aspects of what you could do. So how do you go about it? Usually what you would do in finance, in medicine, whatever, is you would go to a regulator, apply for a license, or have to fill out present a bunch of documents, etc. Not guaranteed to give you what you're really looking for, which is a reduction of risk. Why? Because all the incentives are messed up. I mean, I can go into that, but I mean, I think it's going to be a rabbit hole that if you want, we can get into. But in any case, all the incentives are wrong. But where are the incentives right in terms of reducing risk? Who are the best of that? The insurance companies. That's their day in and day out business. That's what they do. They look at a system and they say, hey, how risky is this thing? All right, based on that risk, this is what these guys have to pay. So how about we leverage that so that companies that want to operate in this space have to have insurance? By the way, anybody who operates within the zone needs to have a third-party insurance, but the type of insurance I'm speaking about now is industry-specific insurance. So if you wanted to do something in medicine, you would have to get, say you wanted to provide a treatment or medical process, whatever, you would have to get specific insurance for that. But it's market driven, so you have your requirements. You go to 2 or 3 insurance companies that are approved within the zone, and they say, yes, we'll underwrite this, and then you can operate. Now, that reduces the risk because the insurance companies have at-risk capital if something goes wrong. So that's a beautiful innovation because it drives the regulator role to market players that actually have skin in the game if something goes wrong, and that's really really brilliant. And I want to give you a third one that I think is to me one of the most innovative of all. When you are a regulator and you actually pass law, that law quickly becomes ossified for a couple of reasons. One, technology changes super, super fast, and it's super hard to change it to take into account the changing environment. Now, in Prospera, what we did was you actually have the ability to have industry operators to propose regulation. So say you're in the financial sector and you like a bunch of things that are done in Dubai and some things that are done in New York and some things that are done in Hong Kong. And you want to bring them together, but there's that doesn't exist right now. Um, so you actually can propose a regulatory environment for your industry that goes through a very um, complex process of approval, fast but complex, which involves experts in the field and different types of experts really that can look at this. And then once it's approved, it becomes a law of the land and applicable to everybody. So you get away from this risk that you could have specially tailored regulation for one specific group, so all this cronyism that happens. But you actually get to evolve the regulation over time so it gets better and better, and it takes into account new technologies, new players, new ways of doing things, etc. So, and it's brilliant, and we've already seen it in operation. We have 2 or 3 pieces of legislation that have been proposed by industry players. Um, and they do exactly that. That's the role they play. So these are some of the great innovations I think that we have.
But these innovations, so I'm thinking about, like bootlegger and Baptist coalitions or other sorts of public choice shenanigans, right? For example, here in the US, more established jurisdictions, you get people who want to lobby to benefit their industry, to
Which,
create barriers to entry for others and block them from
yep,
participation.
yep.
Does this in some way help avoid that?
Yeah, it does help avoid that because, well, for a number of reasons. I think there's a larger exogenous reason why that happens, and that's because the jurisdictions are under intense competition from other tokens, as you called them initially, other zones. So if you do become a zone, if Prosper became a zone that really catered towards sort of in a crony or guild or type scenario where they're just favoring one group versus another, the natural thing to do is you leave. You move out. You create. You can actually take your district and choose to move the whole district out of the zone and into another zone as part of the system. So that's one sort of meta way you control that. But the incentives aren't there to be captured because of the way the system already works. So, for example, say you wanted to lobby an insurance company to only approve your company. Well, the only way that'll work is if that's the only insurance company that can provide a service. If you have a competing and wide variety of insurance companies that provide the service, and you were a competitor to the other guy, you would just go to the next insurance company and say, "Hey, that guy doesn't want to give me insurance. Can you give me insurance?" And they would say yes because it's there in their interest. So we tried as best we could to create a system where there's no incentive to capturing any part of the system itself because there's no benefit to doing it. And trust me, it was a question that weighed heavily on our minds. What happens in 50 years? We're not here anymore. How can this thing be captured by crony capitalism or special interest? And how do we avoid that? So these groups might want to lobby as hard as they can, but there is very little way for that to happen. At least the safeguards that we've put in place so far have worked and are working.
So if we back up from this a little bit, just sort of like take an order of magnitude or so back from what you're talking about, it sounds like there's this dynamic of competition for law and governance services. It's almost like you're treating the law like a product. And I don't think people appreciate how much that's done around the world now. It's almost like if you think about people who are shopping for a jurisdiction in which to incorporate, for example, they say, well, Singapore has this, Dubai has this, Hong Kong has this. Which one do I want? Which jurisdiction do I want to establish my firm or my venture? And there's almost a way in which, in terms of at least the regulatory framework, you can still you might do it that way. And that's what we call, I think, jurisdictional arbitrage.
Yep.
But there's a way you can do it in Prospera where you can select from a menu of regulatory options in a way. Am I missing that, or is that,
Do you mean for like incorporation and that type of thing? Because you can for, these regulated industries, you can choose the OECD countries regulatory framework for a bunch of different things, medicine, et cetera, as we were discussing earlier.
right.
You can, but what we're very cognizant of the fact that there's a lot of competition, for example, in the incorporation aspect of this. So
Mm,
just in our backyard, there's Panama, there's a lot of the Caribbean islands.
yeah.
Um, so, you know,
Well,
you,
and there's also this, so I want to serve a certain market, and I have to get through a regulatory gauntlet with it. You talked about medical products, for
yep.
example. So if I'm going to serve that market, and it's a big market and it's regulated market,
Uh-huh.
then I'm going to have to meet certain kinds of regulatory thresholds
Yes.
in that market. But I want to enjoy other benefits as an entrepreneur that allow me to mitigate problems associated with tax or other aspects of incorporation that may not be so favorable.
Yes.
Sounds like you guys have figured out a sweet spot that allows you to maximize flexibility in this regard. Forgive this brief interruption, but I suspect you're here because you're disillusioned with legacy politics. If you're a creative, a builder, or an innovator, you might be ready to win funding. Through Human Respect Labs, you can get up to $30,000 to fund your next creative project. But not just any project. We're looking for 6 kinds of builders: video storytellers, community builders, writers, entrepreneurs, strategists, and innovators, any of which should be dedicated to human liberation. That means making government obsolete. Why? We know too much energy goes into politics, but not enough goes into real solutions. So if you're a freedom lover and you have a project idea that promotes peace, autonomy, and voluntary collaboration, we want to hear from you. Apply now at humanrespectlabs.org. That's humanrespectlabs.org. Criticize by creating.
Yeah, we have. And there's nuances to it all, of course, but I do think that we have, because we allow, I mean, the medical space, I think, is a great example, because it's a very highly regulated space, seems to operate under the premise that everything is dangerous, massively dangerous, and nobody should try, though that's been changing. There's this right to try movement and everything. But we don't think so much about the people that, if they had been given an opportunity to test a therapy, would they be alive today, or would they have a better quality of life today, et cetera. So what we've seen is people choosing to incorporate and Prospera for these types of industries, because they can get to market quicker, they can do their research quicker, same ethical standards in a competitive environment, and offer their products if within the zone. So people have to actually fly in to get the treatment at this point. But the beauty is all the data that they are able to gather from these therapies, they can then take back to their home countries and use it as part of the approval for that country, um, which I think is an enormous benefit, and really a benefit that arose out of this sort of without knowing. But I think you make a really good point that I just wanted to get back to, which is this idea that we see governance as a product. It's definitely a service. The way we see it, and we see the residents, the users, whether they're physical or digital, we see them very much as clients. So you try to treat them like clients, because they don't have to give you their business. You know, they can choose not to give you their business, and then you're in real trouble.
Yeah, and if nobody gives you their business, then you're toast. Then you're
Then you're
just
toast.
then you might as well become a golf course, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly right. And that's the thing that I think most people that criticize us don't get. They're coming from this paradigm where we have a sort of a captured market, where we have a group of people that are there, and we're going to be able to extract value unethically no matter what. And it's exactly the opposite. Is everything we do to attract people is because they have the option to leave, or they have the option to not participate voluntarily. And that's an enormous difference from any country. If you're a citizen of the country, trying to renounce your citizen is massively difficult. And granted, we're not a country. We don't want to be a country. We are a jurisdiction that's part of a country. But it's a beautiful thing to do what the Swiss do with their cantons and what the US does with their states, where you have the option to leave if the rules that you're being subject to you find unbearable to yourself. And that's a litmus test at the end of the day that's applied to anybody in Prospera, that they
That's
apply themselves.
that's I try to point this out to people, especially, on this platform. And it's a difficult thing to do, even especially within the United States. I mean, for one thing, you get a lot of let's call it aping, institutional aping from one state to another.
Yeah.
But even then, you've got this gargantuan federal government and its regulatory apparatus that sits heavy on top of all 50 states. If we were, and sorry to sound like a Yankee,
No worries.
bloviating about American stuff, but if you were able to remove this massive Leviathan regulatory state and taxation regime in our Constitution in the 9th and 10th Amendment, if it were in force, we would not have the federal government with its mitts and all this stuff, with its fingers in all the pies and its regulators in all the businesses,
Yeah.
because you would have at least 50 regulatory, I guess, sandboxes, if you like. Well, we do get that, but it's a very narrow band of regulation and a very narrow band of stuff that affords you the opportunity for jurisdictional arbitrage. So certainly, yes, we see people coming from California to Texas all the time. Just, masses and masses of people migrating out of California into the neighboring states, but especially Texas and Arizona. And likewise from New York, they come down to the Carolinas where I live.
Yeah.
And in that process, you get this soft, quiet, popular revolution, but the benefits of doing so are still in this very narrow band. You still got the weight of the federal government
That's
bearing
true.
down on everybody. And if you could just get rid of that, you could still have, the 50 states and all of its various approaches, but you would have a larger menu of options if you voted with your feet. And
Agreed.
and it'd be even cooler if you didn't have to vote with your feet, but we'll set that aside for a moment.
Would be.
If you could vote with your computer or vote with your what have you. But let's step back for a moment and go back to the beginning. Let's say it's hard for me to identify a genesis point. It might be the establishment of the Reds or the Zetas, but what inspired you initially to try to do this? I mean, how did you even think of it? What was the inspiration? Was it another person? Was it the idea? Was it the potential of the Zeta itself? What was it?
It was a combination of a person and an idea. My grandfather founded a university in here in where I'm from in Guatemala, which is a quite well-known university in classical libertarian circles called Universidad Francisco Marroquín, or UFM for short. And so he had this perspective that if you taught people, the elites, the people that actually shaped the country, thought leaders and business leaders and academics and politicians, if you taught them the principles of what a free and responsible society um, were and how they created wealth and prosperity for all, that they would choose to move the country in that direction. So he founded the university, and for most of his adult life, I would say 50 years, he fought in that direction. Towards the end of his life, he attempted to reform the Constitution of Guatemala, and I was old enough at that point to work with him a little bit. And there's a famous, which I learned later, but it's a very famous, I would say, concept or idea that if you try to change something that affects everybody, nobody will support you in changing that thing because everybody lives from the system as it's configured. whether they talk ill about it or not. They're still living off it. So contractors are hate it, but are living off of it. Other politicians, business leaders, etc. So we failed, and he failed at passing the constitutional changes, but he succeeded sort of at educating a large group of people. And in that interim, Honduras was starting its process towards the creation of what was originally the Reds. And the president of UFM at the time, who wasn't my grandfather, was another friend, said, "Hey, I was really down. To be honest, Max, I get really passionate about these things. So I was really down that we hadn't been able to make these changes. And so my friend said, "Hey, there's another way to reform, and it's you create a regulatory sandbox within a zone, part of a country, hit the reset button, and you start new." And to me, it was like, whoa, whoa! I had never thought of that. I'd always thought nation state size. And really, now that I know more history, I know that nation state is a really recent development in the history of the world, maybe 200 years, 250 years, Napoleon onwards, right? But to me, it blew my mind. So I immediately latched on. Honduras was in the process of approving this, so I latched on to that. And I just became enamored of the idea, and I began trying to do it first in Guatemala, failing here. Honduras had a unique set of circumstances. Then deciding that it was going to be very, very difficult to do it here because those circumstances weren't present. So I needed to do it in Honduras, such that it became such a powerful example of change that the neighboring countries and then beyond would have to look at this. And actually, there's a really good precedent for that. If you look at Singapore actually changed all of the Malay Peninsula, and you could argue up into Vietnam. So Singapore became so successful that Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia all changed towards a more market-driven economy because they were just getting kicked in the nuts by Singapore. They were growing so fast that these guys in order to be in the game, they needed a change. And you haven't asked me this, but this is sort of my aspiration, my end goal aspiration is that we create something so powerful. It's so evident that this is the way to reform and to generate prosperity more broadly than has been created now, and really solve the world's biggest problems. Because at the end of the day, that's what we want to do. That people will just have to adopt it because otherwise they'll be left behind. So it's a very powerful incentive system that we're trying to create, while at the same time doing really good things for those people that currently don't have the best opportunities in Honduras, and for builders, etc. So a little bit of a sidebar there, but that's where my thinking is.
Well, I want to express my reverence for a moment for your grandfather. His nickname was Muso, right?
Yep. Yeah, it was Musa. Yep.
And he strikes me as that both prophet and builder in a sense that I described at the beginning, and you certainly have that in you.
Thank you.
But I'm starting to see some of the dynamics in Latin America. They're early. They're just a glimmer. They're just a shoot of possibility emerging now from the good earth.
Yep.
But it gives me a lot of hope. And you're one of those shoots. Prospera is one of those shoots. But also I'm thinking about some of the changes and the mode and manner in which this change has occurred is different in, say, Argentina with Javier Milei. But that is another data point for evidence that prosperity has to be created. It is the exception.
Yeah, it is. Yes.
And that and I realize that you have some of these sort of like incumbent firms, like these big lumbering, heavily regulated, heavily taxed firms that nevertheless are monopolies because of the tax and regulatory environment in these countries.
Yep.
But when they start to see all this dynamism and competition, will they learn the lesson from it? I think one could argue also that, Bukele in El Salvador is doing some good things in this regard. And people are going to talk about how, in certain respects, he's a dictator, and he's an autocrat, and he throws people in prison willy-nilly and all this stuff. But in terms of just the economic part, it's interesting to see how they have been able to shoot up. So you have these examples, these islands of prosperity that are starting to burgeon in Latin America. What do you think is going to be the tipping point, and how long will it take?
Well, the first example of this is always the most difficult. One thing we encountered continuously was when we spoke of Hong Kong and Shenzhen and the China miracle and Dubai and all that. Everybody would say, "Oh, yeah, but that's over there. Over here, things are different."
Mm-hmm.
Reality is they're not, but that was one of the things. So you needed a strong, powerful, successful example, and I think Prospera in Honduras is that. Now, I got to tell you, this is going to go beyond Latin America. Because the problems that we're solving are common no matter how wealthy the country is. I mean, I do see the opportunity in the US. The US is looking to reshore a lot of its manufacturing. It's not just a talent thing, it's a regulatory thing. The regulation that needs to be stripped out, it's so hard to strip out. Even if we could determine, hey, these are the 1,000 things we need to strip out, and they're all good things to be stripped out. It's super, super difficult because people already are using the system as it's established, for profit. So you need these regulatory sandboxes, even in countries like the United States. This would be magnificent, for example, for Europe, which is also stagnating, and some people are even speaking of the suicide of Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And this would be fantastic for example, war-ridden countries where rather than have a bunch of people fleeing that country, you establish zones within that country that have the right conditions so that people migrate internally rather than migrate to whole other countries, whole other cultures, etc. But I do think that in Latin America, the Prospera example in particular is going to be is a very powerful example. I constantly speak with leaders of other countries, whether in business or government, and they, at first it was dismissed a few years ago. Now there's enough of a echo chamber effect where people are starting to pay attention, and I think there's an understanding that zones like this are a great way as an additional form as an additional effort to reform. I can tell you in Argentina, for example, the government of Argentina was keen to make all of Argentina into a zone, a Prospera type regulatory environment, if you want, maximum freedom, in everything, and I think it's a marvelous effort, but those that oppose it are also extremely powerful. So it's a very laudable effort to do that, but at the same time, you need to have a plan B, and the plan B is these types of zones for a country like Argentina. So I do think that we're going to be seeing a lot more of these. The more successful Prospera is, the more powerful will be the siren call. I think the third-party countries right now we're still having to push, but we're starting to hear the call. Hey, what are you guys doing? How are you doing it? Could we do it here? The curiosity is starting. These are multi-decade long projects, of course. So we are seeing that, Max, and I think it's promising. I think it's very, very promising.
My kids ask me what I do for work, and I say, I write, talk into a microphone, and hope people send money. Now I'm questioning my life choices, but the kids gotta eat, and we have bureaucracies to topple. Support our work at underthrow.org, and for less than $5 a month, you'll help me rouse the rabble. Wait, what's underthrow? If overthrow is violent, underthrow is peaceful yet powerful. Real change doesn't start in Washington. Casting your vote with millions is like crying a teardrop into the ocean. Instead, we build consent-based communities that make traditional power structures obsolete. Left, right, or center, it doesn't matter. What matters is creating options for opting out and opting in. We build parallel systems in which people thrive, then just leave the old systems behind. It's about choosing communities, not imposing them. So, support the show, feed my kids, Read the newsletter and discover why most subversive acts amount to building a better civilization together. Visit underthrow.org. Well, this is going to sound like a strange question, but maybe franchise is the wrong word, but is the Prospera model replicable in other jurisdictions? So, this is actually two questions, and we can come back to it if I remember the part that's lingering in the back of my mind. Knowing that the environment that it took so much doing just to establish the ZEDEs, right? That fact that there is an integration, there is an institutional context in which you have to establish something like first a ZEDE, and then you have to establish Prospera in particular as a layer one solution for law within the ZEDE, right?
Yes.
So we imagine, let's say you go to some country that's suffering in Eastern Europe, okay, and I'm imagining this, right, because Europe is dying, and Eastern Europe is, in many respects, the potential future, given how the EU is just
100%.
just turning it all to shit, frankly.
Yeah, frankly, it is. Yeah.
But it's not such an easy matter. What would it take, and is it possible? Have you ever thought about franchising Prospera, or at least extending its and adapting its model to the institutional context of other faraway places?
I think it's a great question, and the answer is that we created it with that vision in mind. So we want to have multiple Prosperas, a constellation of Prosperas around the world. There is a ton of value in that it helps the countries that are your hosts understand that that it's very easy to, the switching costs between host country are very low. If you have a similar system, say if you had the system in Honduras, in Argentina, say in Bulgaria, say in, I don't know, in Lesotho or wherever, you have these countries all have a similar system. And so if you have to move, it's very easy to move, right? Because it's all within the same governance framework system that we've established. Now, some countries, we always have to respect the constitution of those countries and have to create a regulatory environment that fits within the system of the countries. But in essence, we choose countries that will allow us to have the regulatory autonomy that we need with country supervision, always country supervision, but with the autonomy that we need for us to be able to make the model work appropriately. So the answer is absolutely yes. There's actually two systems. We can actually run the zone or promote the zone ourselves. In Honduras, the way the system works is that there's a promoter and organizer, and that's Prospera Global. And then there's Prospera the Zone, which is a political subdivision of the country. Think of it as a municipality. So we can go to other countries and promote similar systems, or there might be some nuances, but what we want to do at the end of the day is layer in the stack of governance services, which are codified digitally. So if you go to eprospera.com, you can interact with our governance system, and you can do that digitally, or if you're a physical resident, you can do that within the zone itself as well. And then if you create a network of these zones, you have that ability that I was saying where you can move around. But the value you create, for the Prospera shareholders is also very, very large, because you create real anti-fragility. Because you will always have governments that are, the 4-period, the people in government for a period of 4 years who will see this as a threat to their own power base, which they don't like. They will not see the positives of it. So being anti-fragile in that sense is important, because you want to be able, the most important thing builders value is long-term stability, even more than low taxes. If you can actually say, hey, for the next 50 years, this is the system I'm going to operate under, that's magic to my ears as an entrepreneur. Now I can plan. Now I can really plan. I don't know what the crazy things these guys are going to do in the future, and that adds risk. But if I'm able to just look at it long term, then it's beautiful. And that's one of the most powerful things that we provide in Prosper is long-term stability.
Yeah, I see. Well, that long-term stability, that's going to be one of the that's going to be one of the resplendent gems that you're able to say, look what we've been able to do.
Yep.
Look, we built a mini Hong Kong here in Latin America. But before that happened, well, so first you have, let's call them the useless eaters of the bureaucratic class in Argentina, right?
Yep.
And Millet came in with this chainsaw and he said, afuera, but he's only got a few levers he can work with because in other respects, he needs legislation and those things can be blocked.
Great.
This is what's happened in some measure with Doge and the Trump administration in the United States. Never mind that they're not particularly doctrinaire about their freedom institutions in certain ways, and that's problematic. But setting that aside, there is at least a subset of folks in this administration who want deregulation, want less spending, want this, want that, but they just this ram into popular pushback from certain quarters, and they run into the very well-fed bureaucratic or managerial regime. Okay, it's the Greater Washington essentially, who doesn't want to let go of power, and their supplicants, their corporate supplicants, are all benefiting from the regime as it is. Right, as you said earlier, the butter's their bread. So why would they want to change? Ideologically, I have this trope that I sometimes use in my writing called the one true way, and it's basically a way of accusing people of saying, it's like, why is it that your system, whether Marxist or market economics, pure market economics, has to be imposed on everybody? And the Marxist would say, well, because it's dialectical materialism, and we want to you have to seize all the means of production so that the laborer is able to realize his or her own flourishing in equality, right?
Yep.
To each according to his need. And then of course there's the market column. Let's just use their terminology, the market fundamentalist, who thinks that you have to establish the right set of institutions that are going to give rise to the perfect set of laws that in turn give rise to prosperity and happiness and freedom and so on. But what we find is the world is really warty and stuff doesn't work that way. And what you did that's different from this sort of I'm going to come to power and then I'm going to change everything Malay model or Bukele model is to say, let us try, let us experiment, give us a niche, let us establish a niche. We'll show you what we can do. We'll show you that we can outperform other systems, that we can help people flourish, and then if you try it, we'll like it, and then those competitive dynamics like that of Singapore start to kick in. But you haven't gotten there yet. And in the past, like at the genesis of all this, you had to really push through some opposition, and you're still pushing through opposition. So tell me about that. Have you pushed through the opposition? How are you pushing through the opposition?
Well, I mean, the opposition has been formidable, really. If you think about it, when we established Prospera, who were we? We were a bunch of entrepreneurs, business leaders, um, and dreamers, optimists, builders, who thought, I mean, to be honest, I thought of myself as not naive, but I could see now that I was very naive because I really believed, well, this is the greatest thing that's happened to this sort of this governance, if you want, in the last 100 years in our part of the world, because you have the actual opportunity to reform in a manner that's really helpful to people. My biggest surprise was how much different groups opposed it, from the business elites, the politicians. They opposed this thing, and there was nothing there, Max. I mean, it was a jungle, you know. So what are you opposing? Are you opposing us bringing millions and millions of dollars of investment, creation of jobs? What is it you're opposing? And so experience taught us what it was that we were opposing. And it's the different fears that people have, how that are in positions of power. How is this going to affect my power base? Is this going to make me less popular or more popular? Am I going to be able to run my business the way I've been running it? Is this indirect competition that I wasn't aware of? And so all these fears begin to materialize, and you don't even give the idea the opportunity to grow or see how the opportunity can serve you in your legitimate interests. So the opposition has been brutal to the point where nation state became our opponent.
Yeah.
And I don't think that they opposed us really because they didn't like Prospera or the founders or the investors. I don't even think they opposed the general concept. I think what they opposed was the idea that this hadn't been promoted by them and that it had been promoted by the previous administration, which was their sort of their nemesis, if you want. So you get caught up in these dynamics that have nothing to do with you. Um, and you know, just give me one more. Doy, porfa, no me voy a aprender nada ahorita. All right, just don't want that. I don't want anything going on in the background. So you know, we had to develop a whole area of, we call it internally statecraft, which is just this expertise that meeting with different stakeholders, whether they're in the US or whether they're local, whether they're business, whether they're political, to state our case, make ourselves known, because there were some legitimate concerns. For example, what if these zones that are being created in this third world that's immersed in all this corruption, narco activity, what if these zones are taken over by, you know, transnational criminal organizations, for example? What happens then? So we needed to make sure that we became known entities, and you know we've had to spend enormous amounts of money in areas that we never thought we would need to. Um, and now, as a matter of fact, now we know that we're gonna, no matter where we go, we're gonna have opposition, so we can better prepare for it. I think, Max, at the end of the day, we I think two things have really, I know for myself, and I'm pretty sure for Eric too, and for the rest of the team, I think as well. You have to be a massive optimist and you have to have a massive commitment to the vision of the world you have, way beyond the idea of just making a buck. You know, this is not about making money. If we make money, I want to make money because our investors have trusted us with an idea and we have said we will return a really good investment. And so that's a motivation. I'd like to make money if I added enough value voluntarily to a ton of people. And that means that I can get a return too. But that's not my most important motivator. I want to see a world that, I think the world where it is needs a new jumpstart. And the new jumpstart, I think, is with a constellation of these types of zones around the world, which allow people to just get out there, build the future that they think is possible legitimately and ethically, solve the biggest problems of the world, add value to everybody else in a manner that's not compulsory, and just have a world that can be so amazing, which we're able to do. I mean, I think that's the most frustrating part, is that we can have that dream world. And in many ways, we already have it, but we can have more of that good stuff. Why not have more of that good stuff? And these are this is the conduit for that. It's, in many cases, it's the rehashing of the Hanseatic League, you know, and the Hanseatic League. It's a really interesting period of history about the year 1000 to the year, I don't know, 1500, broadly speaking, where these cities with a lot of specialization and economic activity obtained commercial freedom for themselves from the ruler of the principality or their kingdom. And they were able to transact uh, in a manner that allowed for a massive amount of innovation and progress in the world. Why? Because the units were very small, very nimble. They could really compete, and competition drove all of these people to add more value. So that's my vision of the world. I think that we don't need, I think we can solve most of the problems we have in the world today through these types of jurisdictions. And even Mars, thinking of Elon and SpaceX and what he wants to do in Mars. The governance question on Mars is a real important question, because you don't want to replicate the institutions you have on Earth necessarily. You want better institutions. So even as we branch out into space, we need to think about these things.
Absolutely. And in thinking about that, thinking about, Elon, for example, wants to be known as the guy who helped colonize Mars, or get humanity off planet to be a multiplanetary species, as he's
Exactly.
fond of saying.
Yeah.
And I sometimes think, oh, that's wonderful, and it certainly would be, a human achievement, the likes of which we have never seen. But I also think about people like people who, work in these civil service jobs, and some of them get Nobel prizes, and um, and and I think about people who are so unknown, like Bob Haywood, for example, whom
Yep.
and I'll do my very best to remember to put the link into the description for an article about Bob Haywood. But I said something to the effect about Bob one time that he's done more to lift poor people out of poverty than any person alive today, and no one knows who he is.
Yeah. It's amazing.
And just because he helped gingerly guide people as a consultant to institutional change in places in the world that really, really needed it. We have right now this extremely toxic message in the United States about decenter whiteness, or decenter European people, and decolonize America, decolonize this. And the bugaboo, the devil, is settler colonialism, right? That has also happened to you, I'm certain, where the idea is that Prospera is just a neo-colonial,
Oh, yeah.
neoliberal project, and everything is a zero-sum game, and it excludes people and concentrates wealth. It doesn't create wealth. They don't even know what wealth creation is, but this is the narrative that holds sway. What have you
Yeah. We found that.
done to counter that? And I'm quite curious about what Bob has done to counter that, frankly.
I don't know what Bob's done, but I do agree with you that he's an unsung hero in all of these things. Uh, he was there before a ton of us were. So he's been, and there are others as well. I mean, there's others. But I do agree that, it's just easy. If you think of human motivation, there's two things that really motivate you. There's a carrot and the stick. So the carrot is associated with these things that you want to see in the world, and the stick is associated with fear. And unfortunately, the stick is a lot more powerful motivator than the carrot. So people, when you play upon their fears, you don't need a lot of explanation to trigger somebody's fear. All you have to say is, these guys are coming and they're going to take everything you have, and then you're going to be a lot poorer, and you won't be able to, your family won't. And it's all lies. Nobody bothers to check the data. And so initially it was difficult because we didn't have a lot. It was a greenfield project. Real estate takes a long time to build. It's a multi-year. So how do we let people know that we're here trying to do good? And the only way to do that is to show them every day on the ground. So we're set up next to one of the poorest, most forgotten communities on the island, and we became the biggest provider of education, the biggest provider of jobs. We just, but not we weren't giving them things for free. We were providing value for value. They were providing value, a lot of value too. And you see how fulfilled people become when they push against something and it moves. In this case, they could push against the adversity of their life and see how it became better for them. And then these stories begin to trickle out. And so these same people that are initially, many of them perhaps were neutral negative or negative, they begin talking positive. No, I have a job there. It's a great job. I I've never had a job like this before. So there's these sort of concentric circles that sort of ripple out from the center. Every time we would have a negative piece, what would happen is we'd get requests for jobs from people. It's like people remember that, oh, Prospera, and we get a message, hey, do you have any jobs available? So it
Of
was really,
course.
it was really funny in that way. But I think we weren't as savvy um, on how to do that before. I think now we have a team on the ground that is a lot more savvy as to why get the word out, and just a really funny story. I had a client in one of my old businesses that used to say, why hens, I don't know how you say it in English, cockle, I guess, when they lay an egg? And I said, no, they want everybody to know, right? So that's the same thing with us. The good things that we do, they have to be good, but we also have to talk about them because otherwise we'll get drowned out in the negativity and the fear. And I think we've pushed in that direction. I think more good news is going to come. Daily good news trickles out of Prospera. And I tell my friends in the region that look, Honduras is probably going to be the Singapore of Central America, and I just hope everybody else becomes the Malaysia, Indonesia, whatever, so that we need to catch up.
Okay. Two more quick questions. We'll be able to cut you loose back to um, building this building this market paradise there. What first one is how many businesses have been created on in the jurisdiction since its inception?
I think at this point we're over 325 or 350, but I think, I mean, we're looking at potentially having an enormous boost in the next year or so, driven by the fact that one of the things that we didn't have was the ability to create legal entities that had easy access to banking. But we've now solved that, so now there's easy access to banking. So I think we're going to go hypersonic, on the legal entity side, because they're so easy to create, so easy to manage. You just get on your computer, you do it. You don't have to be in the zone. You can do it digitally. So anybody anywhere in the world can interact, create a legal entity, get a bank account, and start transacting. It's like the Estonia promise, but uh, on steroids here.
The world speaks in riddles, markets, politics, power, the very nature of consciousness itself. But what if there were guides, a secret fellowship dedicated to reading the signs, to building bridges between the seen and the unseen? The gray robes operate in the space others fear or cannot comprehend. We map the territory between spiritual awakening and practical revolution, between ancient wisdom and radical innovation. 12 dimensions guide us. One mission impels us. Find out more at grayrobes.org. That's grayrobes.org. Well, okay, final question. It has a dark part and a light part, so it's really a two-part question, which is, I guess, asking two questions and cheating, but hopefully you'll forgive me.
I'll forgive you. No worries.
Thank you. What is the most difficult obstacle you overcame? And what is it in you and in your colleagues that helped you overcome it?
Well, I want to take the opportunity to really highlight Eric, who's my business partner and Prospero CEO. Um, I want to highlight also Joel Baumgar, who's led a lot of our fundraising. Nick Dranius, who's our general counsel. In particular, there's other guys too, but the commitment, the drive, and it's just to me it's amazing that I'm as lucky as I am to have been able to participate with them in this project. I would say that there was a moment when we weren't sure the type of action the government of Honduras was going to take against us, whether it was going to be beyond just the rhetoric, if they were actually going to potentially arrest in particular Eric, who had actually moved there, or any of the other of us. Um, and I think that there were a few very dicey instances that led us to have to think of things we'd never had to think of before. So, for example, security contingency plans. What are the hotlines, for example? We're all Americans, so what are the contingencies to the U.S. Embassy? What are the contingencies to extraction if needed? I mean, who's thinking of these things when we start? Who's thinking that you can actually be in physical danger, you or your family, because you're trying to do good for a place? Um, and well, you guys had that example, I think, recently in the U.S. with the Charlie Kirk assassination. So the stakes become very real. And I think I would say that while none of that materialized specifically, there were instances of manhandling, especially towards Eric, that were very scary. And there was always this threat. Then, in particular, when there were a bunch of services that the government needed to provide to us that they didn't provide to us, they basically shut down, which made it very difficult for us to operate the zone. Customs, financial services, bunch of things that we relied on to operate the zone. Well, I mean, we had to come up with alternate ways of solving. How do we pay people? How do we pay people on time? How do we how do we build if we can't use the custom service that we're supposed to have? Um, but I would say that biggest issue is the negative rhetoric that we've encountered with the government, because while it wasn't existential like the first issue I mentioned, where you could be arrested or they could roll tanks into the zone or whatever, the negative rhetoric scared away our investors, scared away our clients. So
Essential businesses.
yeah, all these businesses that were going to come, that were interested, that were willing to set up in Honduras, and what that creates is, okay, hey, where's the revenue going to come from? Where's the cash that we need to survive going to come from? And luckily, we've had amazing investors that have really backed us all the way through, such that we've been able to survive that. So that was some of the most difficult. And what keeps us going? I would say that I speak for all of us on the team, that we are extremely committed to a vision of the world where freedom, responsibility, voluntarism is the way that we move the world forward. And we've actually, I think, seen a regression of that. We're going actually backwards in that sense. We want to get back to going forward, because that's how we create prosperity for the most amount of people. That's how we solve the biggest problems. So it's it's you have this vision, you become attached to the freaking vision. You're passionate about it. You want to see it happen. You're willing to go through a ton of uncomfortable situations to see it done, and things go wrong. And I mean, I got to tell you, sometimes it's very depressing. It's like, oh my God, what now? What do we, and then the optimist kicks in again, and then there has to be a way. How do we get granular on this problem? How do we solve, the one issue that's the linchpin for the whole issue to come through? And we've been able to move forward. And the final thing I'll say, Max, is this on that. I do feel, and Eric and I speak of this, Providence, I think, is on our side. And it feels that way. I got to tell you, it feels like, how do we dodge that bullet? How did this happen? There's like this hand in the background that's moving things around and make it possible, not without a ton of difficulty, but it just feels like it's going to happen no matter what. And am I telling that to myself so it'll happen? I don't know. I feel like it's not, but it does feel like Providence is at work.
Gabe, thank you so much. I'm so honored to be able to sit here with you. I feel like, guided by the hand of Providence or not, you are certainly avatars of what we would call here in this country the founding fathers. They've been reincarnated as your beautiful team, and I just wish you the very best for your team and for all of humanity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Max, and thanks for this opportunity. I consider you a hero of mine as well. I think what you're doing is so important. The way you frame the issues, your perspective, it's inspiring. Please keep going. And thanks for those amazing words. Come back and visit again and again and again whenever you want. You don't need an invitation. You're permanently invited. So I hope to see you down there again, and maybe we can chat again in person soon.
Oh, yeah. I consider it a second home now.
Beauty. Beauty.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.